Welcome and thank you for coming. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Richard Cooper, and I am the President and CEO of NYSpin. Tonight we thank Netcom Learning for hosting this event. We'd also like to thank the following sponsors. Big Visible has been a sponsor for several years, and we greatly appreciate their support. Turn to Tech, a New York City school and free co-working space. CooperPresents.com, managing our website, managing and hosting other websites. Pearson Education, O'Reilly Media, and Auerbach Publications provide books and ebooks that we raffle off at NYSpin events. PMI considers NYSpin to be a Category B continuing education provider. If you are a PMP, you earn 1 PDU credit for being here tonight. Here's Bill to introduce our speaker.
We're here to hear Neil Jacobson tell us about how inclusive processes can improve the outcomes for big, complex projects, and really any project. He's got 25 years of experience integrating people and their talents with technology, and he's got a lot to tell us. And his experience includes work in various fields in call center appointments for healthcare, government risk and compliance for pharmaceuticals and finance, clinical workflow for public health and analytics, for reporting multi-channel retail, as well as government, not-for-profits, and process manufacturing. That's quite a lot. So I'm sure any questions you might have, he's dealt with kind of questions you have in mind. So I'll turn this right over to Neil Jacobson.
All right. So thanks so much for inviting me, and I'm happy to meet everyone. And so the interest in requirements for me started a long time ago, and it was actually when I was an architect. And I was putting together program documents for a $92 million aircraft construction wing. And at that time, I realized that the quality of the description of what's required, handed off to the people who have to make it happen, is directly linked to the quality of the outcome. And that interest never stopped, even as over time I became an IT person instead of an architect. And so I'm hoping to bring some background and some methods that have been useful for me, because I've seen something that's a little troublesome. And you work, you get requirements, they get signed off, you develop the system, you show it to the user, it goes to UAT, people look at it, they touch it, and you're like, well, this doesn't work for me. And you say, well, what do you mean it doesn't work? You say, well, no, look, I mean, I have to do this, and I used to do it that way. And you say, but you signed off on the requirement. And they say, yeah, but I mean, you can see, can't you? You can see that this doesn't work. And you say, wow, this is bad. And that sort of requirements issue at Rollout happens a lot. And there are some things you can do to try to improve it. And I'd like to go over some of my ideas on that today. It'll be based on real-world examples, and some of which involving people who are in the room. So it's not easy to define requirements. So I'm going to read. I shall not today attempt further to define the kinds of material I understand to be embraced with that shorthand description, system requirements, and perhaps I never could succeed in intelligibly doing so, but I know it when I see it. Well, what was that about? Well, it was a Supreme Court justice. He was actually talking about obscenity, not system requirements. But the point is, it's not easy to define requirements for something that doesn't exist yet. Right? It's not easy. There's tools, they can help, but for most people who aren't in the design process, envisioning something that will be is not something they're very good at. They can react to what is. And so our problem then, in terms of coming up with requirements, is helping them understand what will be and getting in the important requirements so that when it exists, it'll be useful. So what we're going to try to do tonight is talk about how the requirements process might be failing or contributing to failure, especially failure at launch. Talk about how those requirements need to be considered in the context of the business and even the macro context of the organization. Where does it fit in the world? We need to talk about methods, probably methods we already know, but how can we extend those existing methods to better deal with these issues? And then last, I'd like to introduce a new idea. I don't know if it's that new, but model-based requirements, where it's just a totally different approach to capturing and dealing with requirements in a way that they are useful not only for the initial development, but even on an ongoing basis for the organization. So those are the objectives for tonight. And what we're trying to do is combat the elephant test, which is, it's difficult to describe, but you know it when you see it. So that's what we don't want. We don't want to put it in front of people and have to say, well, that's not it. Go try it again. So a little bit about me. I'm a practitioner, not an academic. I'm a project manager, business analyst, have different roles on different projects. Have a PMP, Scrum Alliance certification for Scrum Master. I've served as Agile product owner for a company. I've worked in a wide variety of projects in a number of industries. I've been lucky, been in finance, government, healthcare. Lately, a couple projects with outsourcing, help people integrate with outsourced IT vendors, which is a very interesting space. There's some troubles in that one. And then, as I mentioned, I have a career-long interest in requirements that even preceded my getting involved in IT. And then another thing is I'm aggressively implementation neutral. So when I talk with people about their requirements, I don't like to go down the how are we going to meet those requirement road. And it's a pitfall that I see, and some people call it like solutioning. You know, so when you sit down with folks, they go right into the solutioning. I'm like, well, let's not talk about the solution. Let's talk about what the problem are, what's the requirements. And then last, I'm methodology neutral. I've used a lot of methodologies. I consider methodology as something, it's more important that you have one than which one it is. They all have their pluses and minuses. Some of them work better in some situations, some not so well. We'll go over some of that criteria. So that's my background. It's a little bit about me. I'd like to learn a little about you now. So first of all, let's talk about the roles. Let's hold up hands. How many are developers? Okay. System architects? How about business analysts? Okay, so we have a few more BAs. You can be more than one. I can't add these up in my head. I wouldn't catch you. Project managers? Quite a few project managers. We got any bosses in here? Uh-oh. Okay, that might be a problem in a minute. But other roles, did I not talk about something?
Technical writers?
Okay, technical writers, good. All right, well, we have a varied group. That's good. How about somebody want to shout out some types of technologies or types of projects that you've been involved in?
ERP.
.NET, ASP.NET.
ERP.NET. What else?
Agile,
PeopleSoft, okay.
Data centers.
Ah, okay, good infrastructure. Good. All right.
EHR.
EHR. All right. Then, by show of hands, big organization. Who's from a big company? So, like a third. Small company.
Oh, no.
Okay, so like 2/3, 1/3, probably. Then I heard a little bit about tools. Is anybody using development tools? Modeling tools? No? Okay, great. Well, you know a little bit about me. I know a little bit about you. Let's get down to it. All right, I'm going to come clean right now. Failures. These are mine. So I took my 20 largest projects. Even though I've been on some system rollouts, these are ones that either we developed from scratch or we integrated systems. And out of the 20 biggest, there's overlap in these numbers. I had 15% fail due to requirements analysis. So that means when we rolled it out, at least the first time, that when it got to UAT or rollout, people declared, this doesn't work for me. I've had 5% fail for like technology. People promised what they couldn't deliver. We thought it was possible. It wasn't possible. 15% like scope, schedule, budget type issues. Some of it because of that and that. And then I've actually had the opportunity to work on a number of new products, which you just never know how it's going to go. And so about a quarter of those just didn't succeed. Either the business case didn't succeed or it didn't succeed in the marketplace. My epic fail was a case management system for the city of New York, greater than $1 million project. Had to integrate with city systems in a different department. I selected best of breed software products as the platforms and some integration in the background. We're going to use the integration process. And well, our first iteration, once we got there just a little bit late, got into UAT, wasn't accepted. Basically like, this isn't what we wanted. The second iteration, which wasn't planned, we didn't know about Agile then, we had to go back and essentially try it again, got out, stuck in UAT again. And eventually, the project was canceled. The city actually moved to a different health record system as a platform and ended up tacking on a little case management piece. So that's my big one. The failure related to the big one, I think, was primarily requirements, but we had our technology and our schedule problems. So, since I've been honest now, it's your turn. So, think, be honest. There's only one boss in the room, and he's not yours. So, what's your failure scorecard? So, how many have never had a technology project fail? Good thing, because I was going to come sit down and invite you up front, because you're more authoritative than I am on how to do it. Okay. How many have less than 10% failure?
It's been low.
Okay. Less than 15? Right. Less than 37? All right. Less than 61? Okay. Just off the top of your head, yell out for those with any failures. Primary contributor?
Resources.
Wasn't your programming at all, I'd imagine. But requirements, some?
Resources.
Couldn't get the right people? Yeah.
And budget.
Budget?
Okay.
Sometimes all.
Yeah.
Committing to an unrealistic deadline.
Yeah. I've done that. All right. Well, this slide used to be called "We Are Not Alone," but I thought it was a little presumptuous because I thought maybe you'd all be zero. But anyway, we're not alone. And if you look at all projects, which is over here, people are saying that it's like 37%. That's where I got that one. So 37% are either failed or had to go through some kind of recovery. And if you look at IT only, this is from like a couple years ago. Failed and challenged is 61%. This is from Gartner here, where they're looking at failure and they they try to prove that failure is higher for big projects. And so it was like 20 to 23%. That's the failure rates. So far in the room, we're doing better than the average. I think we could all improve. I'd certainly like to improve. If we look at the reasons, again, this is the failure reasons, the same report that had the 37% for all projects as requirement. Unclear, lack of agreement, lack of priority, contradictory, ambiguous, imprecise. Has anybody ever received contradictory, ambiguous, and imprecise requirements?
Absolutely.
I probably wrote some of those. But, failure type for IT, this was an interesting graph also in the Gartner project, the Gartner report. They list as functional issues, substantially late. This was high cost variance, and the orange one was interesting, canceled after launch. So first of all, I think the first three could have a contributor of requirements, and then the canceled after launch is really scary. They're doing it by size again, but anyway, from 11 to 16%. So we got all done, and we say, oh, not so good, and then we stop. So what Gartner says is invest in truly capturing and understanding the business expectations and functionality sought from the project's requirements, as well as ongoing confirmation of the project's alignment with business strategy. So don't just get it right, make sure that there's a conversation going. So that's part of the recommendation. All right, so we're this far. I'm going to go over what we're going to cover in the rest of our time. We're going to talk about some common requirements gathering methods, where they fit, what you would normally see. Talk about what the pitfalls might be with those for certain project types. Go into how to extend those for a little more inclusive view to better understand how the system is being rolled out. So the business process context and the business environment context. Some specific examples, then go into the alternative approach. We'll come back, we'll summarize by method, then we'll talk about whether or not these methods sound like they would solve any of the problems you've all had in the room. All right, let me check my waypoint. Okay. So traditional process design has a few steps. There's a lot of different methods, but really what you're doing is trying to understand what the overall organization strategy is, understand what's happening now, go into what you want it to be, the vision, come back, and figure out based on the gaps, how you get there. Is it projects? Is it technology? Is it functionality? This was taken from an organization's thinking about governance, risk, and compliance, but it applies for processes across the whole organizational gamut. I think we're familiar with it. The output is normally some sort of a current state diagram, future state diagram, business requirements, and some sort of a solution approach. Anybody done things like this? Okay. There's 100 names for it. Right. What does it look like? Current state could be a process flow, could be tables. I kind of favor these tables because they're really quick. You just draw them up. And the other thing is I cover the process level. What's the process for? What triggers it? What's the frequency? What's the volume? Who owns it? Things like that. And then per step, I try to get people on a happy day. So you sit down and you talk to folks. They love exceptions. Oh, yeah, oh, but it never works that way, and then there's this way, and then there's that one lady who calls every 3 weeks, and then when that happens, and then... So what I try to do is say, great, we'll cover it, let's go in the process, let's talk happy day. Let's go through the happy day approach. And then for each one of the steps of the happy day, what happens, who does it, what you need, what's the output from the step, the exceptions so that they can be happy, and then what you use. Is it a piece of paper? Is it a manual? Is it a phone call? Is it a system? Just put that together. Sound like stuff you do? Pretty common. Talked about this, then get into the exception path, where you allow them to describe what the exceptions are, and maybe you want to quantify, and if the exception happens a lot, maybe it's just a whole separate process. So, future state, here you're taking the vision. Here's one where we have a customer who wants to buy something. They come in, they're met by salespeople. Salespeople use various systems. There's input and output from the systems. Kind of looking ahead. Usually they look cleaner. Not as messy as what happens now, we hope. Another thing you want people to do is think about what's not being accomplished now that they wish was, and I call that stakeholder needs. And again, just get it on the table. What's the problem? Drill in a little bit. Why is it a problem? I also like to talk about how's it solved now? I mean, something's happening. The business must be getting done. And what would the user like to see? Then give some sort of a priority, and then from there, oops. There we go. When you take all those back, you're going to start to abstract based on what the user would like to see, which isn't always, or usually even ever, the solution you want. What's the feature of the system? What do we have to do? What are the pitfalls with this approach? It requires drawing boundaries around our analysis. Because when you go into these things, BA resources or programming resources are in short supply. Stakeholder need is in, stakeholder engagement is hard to get. And so you have to draw pretty tight bounds. And we'll talk in a minute about what that means. There are group activities, or might be group activities, so you get people together. Then there's the politics. Can I speak up in front of them? Then you've got somebody who always speaks up for themselves, and then somebody in the corner who never speaks up, and all that. It documents kind of an outcome. It normally doesn't document everything that people talk about, right? And then those diagrams and spreadsheets we talk about pretty much only describe one thing at one moment, right? It's like we have our current state. And if there's real complexity, our spreadsheets and diagrams can't really deal with it. And you'll find that the stakeholders are like, we can't even go there, let's just forget about it. At the front end, there's other tools we might use. Really to drill into what's happening within a process. And I don't know if anybody's been involved with Six Sigma. Okay. So, if we have suppliers providing input to a process, the process has outputs for the customer, we get the voice of the customer, so then we know what output is needed. And we can really spend a lot of time on a process. That's good. Some of the pitfalls with that are that often the supplier is a customer of another process. So how far out do we go on that? And other times, there's a lot of suppliers for the same thing. And if the suppliers aren't uniform, we don't really understand the input. I'll talk later about some of the impact for that situation. Everybody knows use case guys? Stickman? All right. So again, we have a domain, which we need, but things that happen outside the domain, we may not understand to the degree we need to. So here, I'm going to submit a request. This is kind of from my current world. I'm going to submit a request. I used to do it. I'll do it after the outsourcing. The difference is it'll just be accomplished by somebody else. What's the difference? What's the big deal? We should be able to outsource that. No problem. Okay. Well, maybe to get the details for the request, they used to tap somebody on the shoulder. Now that somebody actually works on the other side of that, you can't get to them. Where are they going to go to get that information? So without going outside the bounds of our system or process domain, we may not understand to the degree we need to what's going to happen. Same thing when we start looking at the context diagrams. It's the same thing. People outside our domain, systems outside our domain. Yet we have to draw these boxes, right? We can't analyze the world. We could. It'd be kind of fun. Nobody's going to pay us to do it, though. All right. Another method. I think everybody knows Agile. Everybody used Agile. Part of the reason the Gartner and the other studies cite that successes are getting a little better is because of Agile. So very good things. I think there's some pitfalls with Agile. I think it starts with the requirement that the definition of the product in the product backlog is aligned with the business. And they don't really talk about it. They kind of leave it to the product manager. The whole idea is that if you give me these things and we do them in this order, we're going to do a sprint and it's going to be usable. That may be, but I'm not so sure it meets the business requirements unless this product approach was well aligned, and we're back to business analysis. We've got to have a way to do it, right? Some other potential pitfalls I see is that the rapid update may not match our customers' change absorption rate. So as tech people, we get kind of used to getting updates, and we're excited to see the updates, and we know what the update's supposed to do. But the more rapidly you're pushing out updates to your users, you'll find out that at some point they're like, okay. The last one, and I lived this one. This was a tough one. So we want. Okay, can't see it. Okay, the business case issues. When will it be done? Okay, that's nice. It's Agile. When are we going to be done? When are we going to stop? Say, well, you know, we're getting feedback. We're keeping a line. That's all right. We got to stop. So when will it be done? Which then begs the question of how good is good enough? And then we go back to this original plan, anticipate how many iterations. And I've been to one where we were doing good work, but it took us too long to get to this point, and by the time we did, the business case was blown out. So. Let me check my waypoint. Good, pretty close. So what are we going to do? So first of all, if I go back and review the Agile problems, people agree? People ever seen any of those pitfalls? Yeah. How about with our domains of analysis? Those familiar? Okay. So what are we going to do about it? Well, first of all, inclusive requirements I came up with actually for this presentation. If something was in my head, I didn't have a word. So it's not a formal methodology. It's really an orientation. And the orientation is trying to better understand how the solution is going to fit in the business process, kind of the smaller view, and in the business environment, which could be just within a company or it could be bigger. It could be a bigger external environment. It can be used with current methods and tools. I'll show you how that works. You can be more ambitious. I'll show you how that works at the end. And I believe that any of these methods can help you really understand the business organization and the process within the business organization. However, is this below your, with the screen? It's not a guarantee of success at Rollout. Okay. So I can start with an example. So VCC, it was a virtual contact center. It was a new business offering from a nationwide healthcare provider. It was centralized call center-based appointment making for their affiliates. They were offering it as a product that the affiliates could take or leave, so they had to be very competitive. And the affiliates were all different. They had different systems, they had different approaches to management, they had different healthcare providers, and they could take this or leave it. Right? So it's pretty much like it's a brand new product. Then they were in the business of reproductive health, which is heavily regulated and varies quite a bit from state to state, and the affiliates were all over the country. And then another thing I'm going to mention up front is that the agent, the primary actor, was the agent, and really what we're doing is outsourcing the person who answers the phone. We already talked about the pitfalls of outsourcing, right? So we're outsourcing the person, so instead of sitting in the affiliate's office where they can be tapped on the shoulder, they're now moving to a centralized location. So the project worked to create a system that would prompt the agent for all the business context around the source of the call. So if I was calling New York City, who knows where the call gets taken, but the agent would know that the business process and the regulatory environment and the systems at that particular healthcare outfit would be considered when they get presented with the script and start going through the process. So that was our job. So how did we do it? We chose Agile, of course. We're no dummies. Then we even chose Ruby on Rails because, I mean, what could be better than Ruby on Rails, a program that people can put together systems in less time, I'm told. So we did that. And we did a prototype. Of course, you got to do a prototype, right? Because we've got this great environment. So we prototyped it. We started off understanding our customers. We had profiles. We structured calls. We had different call flow templates. So we were doing everything right, I think. Pretty much all anybody could do. But then we had to integrate with all these back-end systems. We said, well, we can't really train our agents to know how to do NextGen and eMedSys and Allscripts Tiger. No, can't do that. We're going to give them a consistent interface so that all they have to do is collect information for this abstract appointment, input it, and then our APIs would take care of the rest. So we had to do that. Mentioned that we used Agile. Then from the beginning, we said, well, we have some customers now. We've thought about other customers, but we know that when we finally get the other affiliates, they're going to do some things different that we didn't even know about. So we built a structure for developing custom workflows. Then we said, well, we're leading call center folks through scripts, so we want to give them language that we know we can edit over time. And, oh, by the way, it's the United States, people speak a lot of language, and we're going to have operators with different language capabilities, so we have to have content in multiple languages. So, we came up with an architecture, and the architecture talked about how we're going to connect with the various affiliate systems, how we're going to protect the data that's in those systems, because it's protected health information, and then we're going to have an engine that shows the rules and brings the right language so that when an agent receives a call, it's the right, they get presented with the right language for that particular state to make an appointment at the affiliates that operate in that state. So that's what we did. That was our architecture. In our product plan, remember I said there's a risk in the beginning if you don't have a product plan that's well thought out. We had our use cases figured, we had must-haves, we had nice-to-haves, we had a release plan we thought up front. We figured out where it's happening. It was a little rough here because we had our system, we had all the affiliate systems, so we had a few things to overcome. Was it a success?
Hope so.
It wasn't really. No. Almost from the beginning. We worked really hard. I mean, basically, the client I had was, I think, visionary. We took all the steps anybody could think of at the time. And we got here and we didn't quite make it. When we rolled it out, it was the fact that we picked up the agent and instead of sitting in the clinic, they were sitting together, like in this room, serving multiple clinics. And what was gone? What we found out was our assumption that whatever day-to-day changes to manage the demand of supply and demand would be made with their health record system and their practice management system, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. And in fact, they'd never really done it. They did it because they'd say, oh, Joe, you know, Dr. Neal's not taking any more appointments today, all right? David, you know, Dr. Joe's not taking appointments next week. And that was it. That's all it used to take. Now, they didn't know how to update the systems to get the word to us. So it was like not understanding the full set of requirements or believing that we could build this really robust technology to fix it, and we never could. It was the tap on the shoulder that was no longer possible. And then the other thing, we just had like creeping complexity. Yeah.
What made it possible to, like that one change that you said couldn't do? What made it?
The business case.
Sound like-
It was the business case. We put in place processes, but now essentially we had to have contact with somebody from every clinic who then was giving daily updates on what could and couldn't happen, which was supposed to be coming through on a system basis. And we had to try to train our agents on a daily basis about what might happen if they get a call from this particular location, and pretty soon you can't do it.
I can also see at the clinic, someone who does appointments could also be maybe a greeter or a receptionist. So how do you replace the other functions? You take that off their hands.
Yeah.
Just, yeah, you know, about complexity, UPS calculated that for all the factors they could consider to compute all the possibilities for a route of 25 deliveries would take them like 120 million years.
Right. Yeah, there comes a point when, I mean, here, these numbers don't look big until you start adding them up. So, you know, essentially we were at 5 or 6 customers. The technology worked. The agents were trained. Appointments were being made. The business model was blown up because there had to be more people on both sides than anybody expected. So that's what it was. It was like a business model failure. And then the other thing we found is as we had complex tasks and different text blocks and different screens and different workflows, one customer to the next, they weren't getting more the same, they were getting more different. And with every new customer, they got more different, and pretty soon on the back end of the system, we're just like, oh my God, nobody could keep track anymore. It's like, oh, what am I going to do?
And there was nothing externally that was pressuring them to.
Because they're the
harmonize.
customer,
Well, no,
right?
but
You're
like,
gonna
you'll see
that's
it in banking sometimes. The regulatory environment forces a certain level of similarity between process from place to place,
Right.
because they don't have a choice. Because some external body is saying, you guys have to, capture this data and this information, have to report it in this format to this agency or for this report at this time.
Exactly.
So that causes.
Go.
Oh, I'm
Sure.
sorry. No, I was just saying, there's a lot of times you'll see in certain industries external pressure that forces a certain level of conformity.
Consistency. Yeah.
Consistency. I used to work in aviation, and you definitely see it there. If you go from airline to airline, how they do certain procedures are the same, because if they don't do it that way, they don't pass inspection and they get grounded. So there's a strong business driver to be consistent with the next competitor or the next person in the same industry. But doctors' offices or clinics,
Yeah.
there's not much there yet.
Right, different schedules, right?
Was there some kind of a pilot rollout, like in some last Six Sigma project? There's always this idea of a pilot.
Well, we had a first
Multiple
customer.
pilots even.
We had a first customer whose requirements we kind of made our first pass with. We started to sense some trouble, but they ended up kind of organizationally they were closer to us, and then when they were like kind of invested in it, and then when we pick up new customers, we're like, nah, I'm not sure we want to do this. Oh, I guess the money's good, but we still want to do it our way. So it's like the farther you got down the road, the less invested they were, and if there's no willingness to change, then you end up with this complexity, which in the end, it was too much money to keep the analysts and the programmers around to onboard and update. I mean, that's essentially what brought it to its demise.
So where does this fit on your early questions? Is this a requirements failure or?
I think it was. I think it was a misunderstanding of the impact of a change in a process. I really do. And that potentially if it had been envisioned with the requirement for this next level of communication on a regular basis, I think we would have, I was lucky we were really smart people. I think we would have come up with some way to communicate these day by day or hour by hour changes as part of the script, I think. Yes?
So, did you then apply your inclusive orientation to this, or is the inclusive lessons learned from that? And therefore,
I think it was. I mean, in many ways it was inclusive, and yet there was a pitfall that I didn't realize until like in postmortem.
so now, like, how would we? So where do we go from
How about I'll show you a different one, and then we'll come back from where we go from here.
What you said just sort of reminded me about the city project I worked on. It was delayed for 4 years until they brought me in, and my role was change management lead, not change control, but change management,
Right.
which was a matter of taking the organization and understanding what challenges there were to adoption of the system. And it seems like that's one of the considerations that may have helped. It's still not part of many projects now.
We had something. We were like a product. We started ourselves as a product company, so it was. We had like an onboarding process. So we were trying through the onboarding process to learn what we needed to know, but also help them make good decisions about rolling it out. Which most products help you do that, but the larger the complexity of the product, the more troublesome that step is. Either they can bend to fit your platform, or they can't. And the less they do, the worse the fit is. And so let me take another example, and then we'll circle back to kind of sum this up. So this was a project for an education benefit provider, a big outfit that had grown through mergers. And as each new acquisition or merger came in, they just kind of kept them in departments. So they said, oh, we're all one now, but you guys can do whatever you were doing before. So this went on for a while until they had like 7 or 8 departments all providing, kind of servicing different customer bases, but kind of doing the same thing. And they were still in their legacy systems, and there was a requirement to really have a common platform. That sound right? Yep. So they definitely hadn't integrated the processes. And it wasn't clear, I don't think they had the organizational will to really hammer out and say, this is the way we're going to do it. So the processes had been managed on a variety of legacy systems, but there was an understanding and a belief that they had to go to a common system. And at the time, there was still this open conversation about should they centralize some of the functions, like front office, back office. So we'll let the differences be in the front office, and then we'll do things common on the back. But at the time we were doing the system, there was no agreement. And there were 27 key processes that the system had to support. And by the time we did our analysis, there was 75 different ways to do 27 things. Nice. So what did we do? So I was working with some talented business analysts and developers, and we had like a project lead, project sponsor who understood the predicament we were in. And so he said, well, we really have to do a process review, but here's our politics. We're not going to make anybody do anything they don't want to do, but we better understand what they do. And so this is what we did. So we started with each department. We let them describe their world, starting with the context. Then we went in with each department and we looked at each of their 27 processes. And we used the process diagram that we talked about. So I'm only talking to you, and we're going to describe your way of doing it. And we're going to try to get happy day, but we're going to let you do exceptions. And we're going to discuss what systems you use, and we're going to put in comments. So we did that with the 7 departments and with the key processes. Step number 1. Step number 2, we wanted to align. So the next thing we do is take different departments and say, well, this step, that's pretty much like that department's step. But these 3, they don't do. These 2, they do, but that one, they don't do. And these 2, they do, but they don't. And why do they have all these exceptions and they don't have any? Right? So that's the next step. Literally, we lined it up. And some of these, there were 7 ways to do one thing. So we had this virtual spreadsheet world, which, if we ever tried to print it out, we would break printers. And the next thing, we were trying to get them used to the idea that there's functional flow, but the functions ought to behave pretty similar, except in the context of a different product line. So it's like, if you tell me that it's unique to your product line, you can prove it, we're all for it. But why you have to pay an invoice different than they have to pay an invoice, I don't get it. So we're having those conversations. So that was our model process framework. So we're trying to pressure them a little bit. And then we did, so we laid that over their, comparing to their peers. Tried to use a little peer pressure. They can do that in 5 steps. Why do you take 10 steps? We'd like those 10 steps. So next, as we got agreement or didn't, here to here, we started to create what we call the model process. And by that time, we had a pretty good read of the politics, and we were not going to make anybody do anything they didn't want to do. And that's basically the edict. Okay, well, we can do that. So the model process became a way to do everything anybody could do. But then there were a bunch of controls that people left out. So we were talking to auditors and compliance folks and say, you know what? Even though none of the 7 departments do this, we really have to take this step because we don't have proper control. So we added those in. We started to line up our terminology, and then we described what the model process would be that could accommodate anybody's way of doing it and include what we know we have to do. And then we went in and said which of the steps we plan to support with the new system. Because this one said old system 1, this one is supported by old system 2, and spreadsheet 3, and old system 4. So we got to this model process step. And we handed that off to the developers and said, all right, let's figure now for this model process step, what other use cases does the system have to perform to support that? Then we added another step because, the budget's getting pretty big now, because gotta have some way to do everything anybody could think of. You got to be able to do it in the new system. So we came up with a why we have to do the different things. Could be existing functionality, could be operational efficiency. We start to make decisions about what module it fits in and what release. And this is what fed the systems design.
Was it a custom application?
It was a custom app. We tried to find enterprise app that matched this business case. Couldn't find it. So now, developers in the room. Do you think if you receive this with the reference to the model process, with the spreadsheet showing 7 departments, the way they used to do it, the way they're going to do it now, do you think you understand the business context? I think they did, actually. This one succeeded. And we had some really talented architects who could deal with this complexity. And we had some really committed organizational folks. And one thing they said is that in the end, there was a requirement to help the users adopt these new processes, and there was a whole different standard operating procedure step that said, what's our model process framework, and then for each procedure, we had the RACI matrix, and then ultimately all the way down to, it's almost like a desk level procedure. If you're in this department trying to do this step, you do this, you do that, you do this, and this one you do in STAR. So it was like what step by step, what you do, where you do it, and then we trained them how to use the system separately. So it was a major undertaking for kind of a crazy environment. And I think that inclusive was we cared about the steps that were happening outside the system, and we recognized that those steps outside the system were essential in order for the business process to continue. And we needed to explain it to them that way. Yeah.
I always thought this was a good case for Agile. I don't think Agile was formally used.
I don't think we did, right? No. So David was on the project. There was a ton of infrastructure. So part of the question I always have with Agile is when there's a huge infrastructure that has to be built before you can even start to demonstrate a function.
Right.
How do you do that?
Including data conversion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Was it important to try to incentivize or motivate different departments to get on board to try to adopt as much of this model process as possible?
Above my pay grade. I mean, I was a consultant just so far above my pay grade. It's like I was trying to figure out how to make it work.
And it was taught, let's say, was senior management saying to all these departments, hey guys, this is important. Make this work.
No.
Help the company.
No. I mean, it's a not-for-profit. So it's like it's a different sort of environment. All right, so I'm at, let me check my waypoint. 7:07. Oh, I gotta get moving. Okay. So there's another way. So if we go back where we let complexity get away with us, there's another way you can do it, and I'll call it model-based development. And what it means is a different approach where instead of doing a define, a design, implement, integrate, and test, and go back around, at the definition we do virtual tests, design we do a virtual integration, then our implementation becomes quicker. And we do that through simulation models. And Joe Glick's in the room here. He and I worked on a number of projects together, and we used a method and a tool that he developed. So I'm gonna run through this, and it's really a different way of doing things.
If I could just very quickly mention that graph, that diagram is from NASA, from a study they just recently published, where they compared internally projects that used a traditional approach and projects that used model-based simulation approaches, and that was the results that they published as far as the applications.
So one application, the name we gave it at the time was organizational competency modeling. So what we're really doing is thinking in a different way. And we're trying to model, essentially, we're removing the boundaries. Remember the boundaries we talked about earlier? We're trying to remove those boundaries and be able to model pieces of the organization and how the organization interacts with the external and business environment. And it differs from the typical process design. So we talked about all these issues earlier. And what we're doing is using a method where instead of having the lengthy group where we try to get everybody to agree, we're taking essentially artifacts from previous decisions and modeling those artifacts, essentially the outcomes of the conversations and the workshops. We're taking people's individual expertise and letting them buy into it, so we don't have to have people agree. We can say, listen, if you're the subject matter expert, if this is what you say, is this what you think? We're going to hold that, we're going to put it in the model. You don't have to argue with somebody in a different subject matter area because that's your domain. You describe that. You can describe your domain. And then in the end, we have a way to combine it and bring together the expertise in order to support a specific process. An example of where we did it, we're global pharma. There was a process where people were trying to determine IT risk for a particular project. The old process was the business line talked to an information security officer who interacted with business technology experts. The process was time consuming, and in the end, the results were inconsistent and time consuming. It took how many days for this on average?
An average a week. With 5 people involved.
Right. So 5 people a week and inconsistent results. So using the modeling techniques we talked about, this is the modeling environment. We took information about the relevant regulatory authorities. Essentially, this is the context. This is the external context for this business activity. And we mapped those to compliance products. This is a framework, a commercial framework. This is a product that they were considering implementing, and we understood the relationship. And then we were able to map that internally to our controls and procedures. Have the subject matter experts review it, agree, and even then took the decisions that had been made based on all the scenarios that had been analyzed in the past and came up with the rules for determining the ratings. And in the end, we had a model. The purpose of this isn't that this would be the final system. It would be a full understanding of the context, the business rules, and we could actually pilot it with on real projects. And the outcome was in 20 minutes, we could come up with a consistent result, and we didn't have to involve the subject matter expert. And just real quick, the architecture that came out of it was on an ongoing basis. We had an environment for the subject matter experts to keep on top of regulatory changes and internal policy changes, update the models, and we even transformed information to feed enterprise systems to keep those transaction-based systems up to date with this complexity information. So here we essentially removed a process, but even in the removal, we still had understanding of the greater business context. So it's just one example of a model-based implementation, and the advantage of this sort of approach where it applies is that we capture SME information. So it's not one time, we capture it, but then they're using it on an ongoing basis to evaluate the impact of change. And then from that model, we're feeding other enterprise systems. So that was the outcome. It's a totally different approach, and I just throw it out. It's a different way of doing things, and I think it leads to an understanding of the business environment. So I have how many minutes? When you need it, inclusive of some point. High dependency on internal and external environments. Low degree of control on the actors. Potentially a large number of actors with quite variable process. High levels of SME input. And a high rate of change for internal and external. So those are things that I think trigger the need for a different way of thinking. And I guess at this point, I want to turn it back to you and go back and have you think about some of the failures, some of those you thought that might be related to requirements, and let me know if you think any of these might help, or something else you thought of, or anything else you want to talk about. Yes.
Your model, it seems to me, and I mean, okay, just the model, it seemed to me, and I'm simplifying it seemed to me that it was like a moderated Agile process, like a sort of a combination of requirements gathering, waterfall method, and Agile all together. But you have a moderator, so it's almost like an intelligent, like a one person that oversees things. And
there's a role called a modeler, and a modeler is a little bit like a business analyst, but it's a different process. And they are moderating, but they're not really, I mean, they're not trying to drive an answer. They're trying to capture what's relevant about the business or the external context for that organization.
right, it's almost like a BA PM blend.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what is the background of people who do modeling?
Yes, they primarily, BA, PM, and some ability to think abstractly, but basically one of the key objectives is evidence-based decisions. Like those, where looking at, as Neil's talking about, combining artifacts that have been done before, looking what has happened, and showing people, okay, this is, here's the evidence for the options and trade-offs. They still are going to decide on the options and trade-offs, but rather than being free form.
Right.
Yeah, you don't start with a blank piece of paper. Essentially, you say, hey, listen, we're looking at what's happened in this organization in the past.
Exactly.
Here's the artifacts we can find. Through our modeling techniques, we're showing you what happened.
Right.
Now, you're telling us of what happened, what's relevant for different business situations. So it,
Which to me makes perfect sense, because from a business analyst standpoint, you know the business and you want to guide where things go. So you would do your research, and it's easier for some people to react to things than to actually come up with it themselves. So I find it goes much faster. So it's intuitive to me, but I see how it's not done very
And
often.
there are elements of Agile, because I remember, when you finished your Scrum Master training, and you were saying, some of the things we were doing are similar because, for example, what Neil didn't mention is some of that modeling that was done became the requirements and design that was implemented into some of the Archer modules.
Yeah.
And so it was like, it became an Agile way of them customizing an application rather than going to the
yeah, it's almost like an organizational model. The intent was never that is the system.
Right.
The intent is that's our understanding of the way this organization works, and we're even able to feed it data, external regulator data, so it changes over time. But then we understand how to extract from that the information that different enterprise platforms need in order to operate.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
It makes perfect sense, really, because a project doesn't exist in a vacuum. That was part of the change management practice. It's understanding what the history was, so you can use that to move it forward in a better way,
Well, especially in large organizations, if someone has a certain requirement and you can actually show this was implemented before and here's what happened, it can resolve a lot of issues.
Yeah. No, this is good. Someone should be bringing this up. It doesn't come up too often.
Yeah, it's sort of like another thing I call about it, recycling all of the buried postmortems.
Right. Yeah, it was very much that. Yes, sir.
Something that I had run into and wrote a little bit about was in the context of mostly misalignment of requirements and what was delivered, was the fact that you don't really have typically quality assurance processes on requirements. We have QA processes on the ultimate product, whatever code is or other design, but we don't do QA on the requirements. So I had a couple of suggestions in that particular context, such as having an independent review board. I like your use of subject matter experts as another alternative, but the idea here is we do need some kind of QA process, and a user sign-off is not a QA process. It's an actual, we need something else. So.
Joe and I worked on a project for a global financial firm where they, in their Six Sigma group, tackled the PMO, and we tried to support them as they figured out what was critical to quality of a requirement.
Right.
And that was we collectively didn't succeed. But it was very interesting. They were trying to tackle exactly what, how are we going to know that it's a quality requirement?
It's political oftentimes.
I would say
Yeah.
Well, and also sometimes last man standing, because what happens is when you're in an area where there's a lot of turnover, look for last person standing for the project who didn't get what they wanted in, bring it back, and there's no corporate memory from before, especially if there wasn't a lesson from the postmortem that requirement came in, went through some process, and it was either pulled out after some sort of DOT or was pulled out earlier on.
Right.
And so it gets back in there.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'd be interested in reading more up on this, since you're familiar with this. Do you have any published materials?
No. I mean, I've written articles from time to time.
That's okay.
Okay, I'm
Where can we find
a
it?
practitioner trying to make. I've never written on this exactly.
Good start.
Okay.
Here's your audience. Yeah.
I guess what sort of tools are you using for the consolidation and synthesizing?
That's the modeling environment that Joe's the inventor of.
Okay.
So that's one tool that I've used.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you.